Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Hi, I'm Jill Wine-Banks, not Edwin Eisendrath, but I'm here today to substitute for him, and I have a fabulous next guest. Her name is Professor Rachel VanLandingham. She's at Southwestern Law School, but she is a national security and military law expert. She was a judge advocate general and served overseas in many, including the war zones. She was in the Air Force. And I have so many questions for her. We've talked before on Just the Facts about the bombings of boats in international waters that are allegedly carrying, without any evidence, carrying drugs, and killing survivors of the original attack, which is clearly a war crime. But today, I want to talk about some other subjects. I want to talk, Rachel, first of all, welcome, Rachel. Hi, are you there?
Jill, I'm here. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to your audience.
Thank you. So I want to talk about, we've talked on Just the Facts about Hegseth's attempt to punish Senator Mark Kelly with a demotion. But now I want to talk about discriminatory promotion actions. It looks really bad. Women officers, female officers, and officers of color are being removed by him from promotion lists. People who have been approved for promotion and are on a list are being yanked off for what looks to me like no apparent or legitimate reason. And the result is that the promotion lists are now white male. They do not reflect the makeup of any of the services. So what do you think legally? Is this something that has some comeuppance that we could get Secretary of Defense, not of War, even though that's what he'd like to be called? And maybe it is Secretary of War. He's taking the war on the Constitution. This seems to me a violation of the 14th Amendment. What do you think?
I mean, it absolutely is, and it's harmful for national security. Look, what we really need, Jill, is Congress to step up and provide specific statutory restrictions and procedural safeguards against another Secretary of Defense like Hegseth doing something similar. As you mentioned, he's actually blocked or delayed at least 40 high-ranking military promotions from and mind you, Jill, as you know from your previous position working at the Pentagon, the office of promotion, especially all officer promotions, but senior officer promotions, follow a process that has been set up by Congress under its Make Rules authority under Article 1 of the Constitution. And it's a process that's supposed to be insulated from political and ideological influence. And therefore, there is a rigorous process of boards and selection procedures based on transparent criteria and lists that then go from the secretaries of the various branches to the Secretary of Defense. Roughly half of the stalled promotions, either the ones that were completely sidelined or delayed, have been of minorities and women. We're not even getting to the issue of his mass purge of senior officers, including General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff last year at the beginning of the Hegseth reign. So there's significant equal protection concerns here that these removals as well as delays, blocked promotions are based on impermissible factors in race and gender,
right,
as well as on ideological factors of, for example, Admiral Barnett. He was on the top of the list for a Navy promotion. He was the first one out of 3 following this rigorous process through the Navy, again, a process that's set up by federal statute. And he was removed, reportedly, from that promotion list because of remarks that he made regarding DEI earlier in his career. And obviously, that's ideological based. That's not merit based. Secretary Hegseth says he's all for merit, but he's not. I mean, these removals are very consistent with the things that he has said regarding both race and gender. And we can get into his task force that he's in a report that he's commissioned, reviewing the standards, the combat standards, in an attempt to, what I believe and what many folks fear, an attempt to roll back to prohibit women from serving in combat roles as they've diplomatic success we've been doing for over a decade now. And of course, they were already serving in combat before the restrictions were even lifted in late 2015, because the battlefield is not linear and hasn't been in a very long time. So, Jill, I do think so much of the issues right now, when it comes down to the brass tacks of legality, we know norm-wise that these blocks of promotions of women and minorities and others who have, merely because of what they have said, clashes with Secretary Hegseth's bigoted view of America and of the military, that there's serious constitutional concerns regarding values there. But the actual process, when we get to the actual process, Congress has left some really disconcerting gaps in the statutes regarding giving the president the removal authority, the ability to remove both officers from the list, but as well as giving the president and that's been delegated Secretary of Defense a chance to
he's only allowed to remove,
to delay and promote.
The removal is supposed to be because of some moral or intellectual failing that would interfere with their serving as an officer, not because they are female. And in addition to the promotion list, and in addition to firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was the second African-American to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he fired Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to head the Navy. She was chief of naval ops, and three-star Navy Vice Admiral Nancy LaCour, who, after getting fired, went into politics and is now the Democratic candidate for South Carolina's 1st Congressional District, which was Nancy Mace's former seat. So, I mean, it's not just denying promotions. It's also firing people who have given their lives and spent their careers serving America. And it's because to me, I think the evidence mounts when you see it's not just one person. It's a system where a majority of the people who have been denied promotion fall into protected categories. And there's another thing that seems to me would violate the 14th Amendment, and that is this testosterone thing. There's a mandatory test of all male soldiers. They have to be tested for testosterone. So first of all, it's discriminatory against women because they aren't being tested.
Actually, I read that the edict is gender neutral, that everyone's going to get tested as part of their physical health assessment.
Okay, and then it's voluntary whether you get treatment or not. But there's a challenge to this now in a totally separate case in Reyes versus Talbot. Judge Reyes Judge Reyes in the Talbot case has said, well, how can you argue that you can't have trans soldiers because it would cost too much to give them hormone treatment at the same time you are offering hormone treatment to cisgender males? And that is now being briefed. So I think there's another chance that this could be an equal protection issue if you are denying the right to serve in our military to trans males because you don't want to give them testosterone shots, but you're willing to give other people. And of course, I hate his language. He talks about lethality and war fighting, and we want to improve the war fighting capabilities. Let's face it, drone operators don't need to be physically bulky. I just think...
Right. So, Joe, I like the line that you're drawing, but I do want to drill down a little bit into the actual equal protection claims and talk about testosterone testing policy on one hand and the promotion list, removal list. It's very hypocritical, and I love that Judge Reyes in the Talbot case. Of course, the Talbot case is the case challenging the transgender ban, which is harming our national security. There were two individuals that were airlifted that were taken off the Abraham Lincoln, which is the U.S. aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, in the middle of its long support of the Iran war, even though this administration couldn't figure out how to properly logistically supply that aircraft carrier, leading to deteriorating conditions on board. They were so dead set on removing two transgender members that the commander wanted to remain because they were doing things like working on the nuclear capability of the nuclear carrier. But instead, they were trying to figure out how to get how to remove transgender service members so they could be summarily removed from the military, despite their obvious contributions and the need that we have for all qualified service and especially these experienced service members to be serving. But so Judge Reyes in the Talbot case has said, look, you indeed, the actual policy for the transgender ban states that all members of the armed forces, I'm going to read here, must meet high physical and mental standards, quote unquote, without the benefit of routine medical treatment or special provisions. And now with the testosterone policy that Secretary Hegseth was more worried about touting than he was about properly supporting our service members in harm's way, he said, look, we'll be able to give you you can get testosterone treatment if you want it. So, I mean, it just really shows the gross hypocrisy, and it really demonstrates in many ways the very skewed priorities of this administration.
Right.
It started a war of choice, and it placed our service members in harm's way, and there have been 18 service members that have been killed thus far in the Iran war, and many of those service members were in bases in places like Kuwait and Jordan, in which we knew that they would be subject to missile and drone attack, and yet they were left vulnerable by this administration. And that doesn't count the hundreds that have actually been injured, and it doesn't count those who have been suffering moral injury, the mental health challenges that we saw reported from not just the U.S. Abraham Lincoln. The U.S. Abraham Lincoln was one carrier. There have been reports of mismanagement, poor logistical supplies. There was since April of our naval vessels out in the Middle East supporting the Iran war. So it goes to show that this administration is not planning properly. They're more worried about culture war issues than about actual war fighting. And if they're going to enter a war that they didn't need to enter, which is the Iran war, then they better be doing it the right way. And all our service members, as you know, Jill, salute smartly and sign up and know they're going to be facing austere conditions, but not austere conditions that we're causing ourselves because of terrible management and the gaslighting by this administration. Every time they say, no, there's nothing to see here, you know that we need to double down and peel back that onion. So the fact that Secretary Hegseth said that the reports from actual family members of those serving in the Abraham Lincoln were, quote unquote, misrepresented is offensive. The fact that President Bush, who got out of any kind of Vietnam or any kind of military service during Vietnam because of made-up bone spurs that his daddy purchased for him, that diagnosis.
You meant President...
I'm sorry, President Trump.
Yeah.
That President Bone Spurs Trump, that whose daddy bought out his service commitment. Unlike many that Americans that served and passed away in Vietnam. He said that the Abraham Lincoln that hadn't been out long enough.
Right.
I mean, really, is that really how you're going to treat this very, very serious issue? Look, I mean, we can talk all day long about the propriety of going to war against Iran. It was illegal under international law and under U.S. law, but we're in it now. We've been in it for months and months, and this 6 months. It's unbelievable. It's been half a year, and the fact this administration isn't assuring the American people that it's actually taking care of the service members. So thank heavens, the U.S. Abraham Lincoln apparently is now about to stream home.
Yeah. The supply is a problem because of the destruction of our supply chain in the area. The base was attacked by the Iranians as would be an appropriate military target. So it's really bad. But this is, I think, everything you're saying is proof to me that there's a double standard, that it violates the 14th Amendment, that we are being ridiculous. I also want to say during the Obama administration, I was on a subcommittee at the Pentagon looking at sexual assault in the military. And I got to work with a lot of generals and other officers. And we talked a lot about trans service. And for everyone that I talked to, they said, nobody cares. They are qualified to do the work that they are doing. They do a good job of it. And honestly, nobody cares. We want them to stay. And it's the same thing you're saying, is the admiral on this ship wanted it. And speaking of ships, of course, we have Donald Trump trying to redesign ships to his aesthetic and going backwards in time to a shape of a ship that is more World War II than it is World War III, and to catapulting and I've been on an aircraft carrier, and I understand, not serving on it, but just
me too. I got to land on one and catapult off one. They're incredible, incredible execution, and that involved tremendous training and the best design that we can give them. But
it's also, if you look at like the bunks, some of them are 4 high. It's not like 1, 2. It's most often 3, and sometimes 4, depending on where in the ship they are. I mean, if you want to sleep on your side, you can't do it because there's just not enough room in between the bunks. But yeah, I mean, as you said, service members are prepared for that. They aren't prepared to be denied clean water to shower and shampoo and soap and food. So that's a real problem. But let's now move to a different war, the war in the First Amendment. So today, we now know that the publisher of Stars and Stripes has been fired. The Inspector General, I don't think it was called Inspector General, but something like that, was fired, or reporters fired because they reported on, for example, the USS Lincoln. And so the Pentagon doesn't like that the facts are getting out. And for our listeners who may not know what Stars and Stripes is, it's a daily military newspaper that was granted independence editorially, even though part of its funding, at least half of it, comes from the Pentagon or from the defense budget. But it's supposed to be independent, and it's intended to assure that our military service members get the facts, not propaganda. So they aren't supposed to be a spokesman for the administration. They're supposed to deliver facts. And that seems to be getting in the way of the lies that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth want to tell. So they have fired people at Stars and Stripes.
Of course, because Pentagon propaganda is back in vogue, Jill, as you alluded to. And I want to highlight to your listeners that the Stars and Stripes was a newspaper that was started by none other than General John Pershing during World War I on the battlefield in France, because he wanted to give his service members a chance to be able to write to each other and to speak in his own words. He said, the paper will be written by the men in the service, should speak the thoughts of the new American Army and the American people from whom the Army has been drawn. It is your paper. Good luck to it, right? And so, and then later on, Congress actually, appropriate and authorize monies for the Stars and Stripes, which for decades and decades now has served as a source of news for those serving. And granted, with the internet now, many service members have access to other outlets, but some still do not. And so when you're in a forward deployed location, which Wi-Fi spotty, they still print out the Stars and Stripes, which is why Congress recognized that it needed to be independent. And there was actually an ombudsman from position that's created for the department for Stars and Stripes.
There was an ombudsman. That's who's not there anymore.
She was fired.
Yes.
And why? It's because the Pentagon, as we can see time and time again with the Trump administration, doesn't like facts, doesn't like any kind of critical reporting. Let's look at the overall context here. Secretary Hegseth, there's still litigation ongoing regarding his denial of reporters access to the Pentagon. First, he tried to require them to sign this some ridiculous statement that they would only report what he basically wants them to report. Well, that's not the news. That's your narrative, and that's propaganda. And our founding fathers recognized in the First Amendment that we need an independent press. Why? To hold power to account. This administration doesn't want to be held to account. They know that if they control the narrative, they can win. They want to shape the narrative for particularly not only Americans, but for our service members. And so, Jill, I would link the clamping down, the really Orwellian clamping down the Stars and Stripes and removing its editorial independence, so it becomes just another propaganda source for Hegseth. It has to be connected to Secretary Hegseth's overall politicization of the military.
Absolutely.
This is seen in numerous ways, and never, not simply the egregious blocking and denial of promotions of senior officers, over 40 so far, not just around the over 20 senior officers that were summarily fired, including the purge of the senior military lawyers who were there to represent the rule of law. The reason we have the rule of law, as you know, Jill, is to ensure that power isn't abused. Who represents rule of law in the military? The top lawyers do. Instead, they were replaced by sycophants. And so I would connect this Stars and Stripes, transition into being pure propaganda, to the efforts that Secretary Hegseth is doing to change the actual culture, to make it an ideological and political ally of the far right. I mean, we can see that time and time again on an individual basis. I mean, everything from the transgender ban to blocking promotions of minorities, of women, and of anyone that's actually supported women and minorities. Because every woman will tell you, every minority member, such as my husband, will tell you, they were mentored by white people, because white men make up the majority of the military, and it's the white men that have recognized that if they want their unit to be successful, they need to be able to draw on the experience and skill set of everyone in the unit, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of race. So we've all been mentored by wonderful, wonderful people. And so Secretary Hegseth has even gone after those who have actually done the right thing and been leaders and actually mentored individuals in their units. But he's gone after, as we can see, speech, right? And he's abused the military justice code, abused the administrative system to go after those who dare do things like, oh, guess what? They said something online about, in their personal capacity, about Charlie Kirk. Nothing that would be considered service discrediting, but if they had all aligned themselves with being anti-MAGA, they were administratively suffered adverse actions. However, we have folks out there, there's a particular lieutenant colonel right now who's all over social media saying really atrocious things about his fellow officers. But since he's saying these atrocious service discrediting and actually saying things that are prejudicial to our discipline, but since he's saying it for the right, he's untouchable. And so it's really a stark and rather Orwellian environment for anyone in the military right now. I've known many military members reach out to me and tell me that they're scrubbing, that they scrub their social media feeds and pray that no one goes back to the Wayback Machine and does a deep dive on what they've said, because they didn't say anything they weren't allowed to say, but there's a political witch hunt and ideological witch hunt going on right now.
Going back to Stars and Stripes, I want to say, it's not just that they enjoyed the freedom of the press and independence of the press. It was codified in the Code of Federal Regulations, and now, sort of without following the Administrative Procedures Act, they have pulled those regulations to deny the independence and to change the rules. And so I think there will be consequences. I think there will be a court is going to say you can't do that. You have to have public comment before you can change those rules. And I would hope that people are outraged enough and that the military speaks out on its own behalf, saying we want to get facts. We want to get not propaganda, and that they will do that. But there's another First Amendment issue before we only have about 2 minutes left. So I want to ask you about the new Christian curriculum for schools on military bases that is supposed to teach Western civilization, that Islam is inherently violent, and Christian principles in violation, to me, of the First Amendment. How can they get away with that?
Well, they can get away with it until the courts step in and say, look, there's something called the First Amendment, and you're not supposed to be establishing a religion. So really this idea, this moniker of Western civilization, it's a Trojan horse for Christian education, right? Yeah. And Secretary Hegseth has made this very, very clear in many of his comments and his interviews that the administration is trying to align the military's, I mean, not only just the Defense Department schools in which service members' children go to these schools because they don't have access to a U.S. school. Most of these schools are overseas. And not only is the Trump administration trying to align those schools with its political vision and its Christian vision, it really seems like Secretary Hegseth is also trying to do the same thing internally within the military's education system itself for its service members. We saw the book ban that was challenged challenged. We saw books being removed from the Naval Academy. But as you highlighted, yes, this definitely seems to cross lines. Look, curriculum challenges, raise a lot of emotions and get a lot of attention. And so there are bodies out there, impartial bodies that look at curriculum and say, okay, look, is this a product of a scholarly process? There may be two different opinions, or many different opinions, or alternative viewpoints for a particular issue, such as Christianity. Is Islam a more violent religion than Christianity? Here, the curriculum, the book that they've actually chosen, is not a product of such scholarly output, because it fails to mention things like, the Crusades. Really, you're going to say that the Crusades really weren't a product of and the Spanish Inquisition doesn't represent Christianity as violent. So, I mean, it's the overall context or the overall presentation of this material in a very skewed way shows that this is part of an agenda, and it absolutely needs to be challenged. And so, again, this administration, that's what it does. It inflicts the damage first, and then the litigation takes a while to try to roll some of this roll some of this back.
Just like the destruction of the East Wing, you pull it down, and it's gone. You can't put it back up. I mean, you could get Congress to get off its duff and maybe give the money to say you can't build a ballroom, but you can duplicate what you destroyed.
But these service members deserve to be back on those promotion lists. But I mean, many of them, I believe, are fearful of filing suit, because then there's retribution. If Secretary Hegseth was willing to try to go after retired Navy Captain Senator Mark Kelly and demote him in retrospect, which the courts have already stopped, but it's still, the punishment is the process. Surely these folks are, take a second beat to think about, do I really want to enter into this litigation in which it may lead to other negative collateral consequences? I mean, the chilling effect is real. Oh,
it's unbelievable. Well, thank you very much, Rachel, Professor VanLandingham. This was a great conversation. I look forward to talking to you again.